Greetings, salutations, and hello. I am your benevolent Satan, and I am here to welcome you to Season 3 of Musical Shenanigans. I have a delivery here from DHL, the only ones that deliver this far. And should be somebody in here and a script for what the lads want to do. Going to do a really big production to welcome in their new season. Ooh. Well, welcome to Season 3. Praise me, cheap bastards.
Welcome back, folks. This is Cory.
And this is Dave.
And this is Scott. Praising Satan.
Praise Satan. And welcome to Season 3.
That's right. That's right. I forgot we were on Season 3.
I feel holy and pure here. Dicks!
In Season 3, we are going to discuss Scott's Tourette's diagnosis.
It was very unfortunate, yeah.
If you've been with us for the first 2 seasons, you know what we're doing here. But for those of you who haven't been with us for the first 3 seasons, quick recap. We are taking a random selection of albums from the Rolling Stones' top 500 albums of all time, pitting them against one another in our own bracket, and coming up with our list and seeing how much we agree or disagree with Rolling Stone. We just wrapped up our wild card round, and we are heading back into our main bracket. Long story, that's probably all you need to know about it without us getting into the details. Yeah, exactly. So we're heading back into our main brackets, and we have 2 matchups today. We have Los Angeles by the band X, who will be taking on The Who's rock opera Tommy. And Melodrama by Lorde will slug it out with the debut album from Oasis, Definitely Maybe. So with that,
Speaking
Cory, you want
to... dicks.
Yeah, well, yeah, true.
Yeah.
So, Cory, you want to talk us through our first round here?
Okay, in our first round of our 3rd season, we have 2 albums that could be considered groundbreaking in their own ways. We have the band X from the West Coast, a spin-off of the original CBGB NYC punk scene, creating a new sound that would alter punk as it continued its journey west. Very synonymous with Cheers in Boston and Frasier in Seattle, but absolutely nothing like that. X's first album, Los Angeles, takes on the self-named rock opera Tommy from The Who, a very twisted and self-indulgent album based on a story that was harder to follow than the original clues of the Golden State Killer. A program with 10,000 lines of code was run to determine the first album to be discussed, and it chose Kanye. So it was scrapped, and we flipped a coin, and our discussion on Los Angeles will kick off our season with Double Dave.
In a horrible way.
Yes, we now have 2 Dave sessions here.
I'm not sure what happened. I got punted off of our little video call here, but I'm back, and for some reason now there are 2 of me on the screen.
Yes.
Wow, lucky you. It's
well,
double the Dave and dicks. Yeah. So
it's 2 for Tuesday.
Yes. All right.
Double Dick Tuesday.
There we go. Just one Dave, and we'll begin with Los Angeles. This was an album released in 1980. This was a punk scene new John Doe, which many people know from this band and his solo career. It started with their guitar player. Billy Zoom really liked what he heard about the New York punk scene, and with a blurb about the Ramones being too loud, too noisy, too violent, no guitar solos, dumb lyrics, and stupid, said to himself, this is what I want to do. So he took out a classified ad in LA, and he picked up John Doe, who dragged along Exene. I don't even want to try to.
Yeah, it's his girlfriend. Her first name was Exene. Her last name is impossible to say, so we'll just call her Exene.
Yes.
You know, what I really liked was the fact that that X at this point was very punky still and kept a lot of the punk dynamics, but musically they were a lot more polished.
It is for a punk album. It's one of the most musical punk albums I think out there. Honestly, it's really melodic. It's actually really quite good.
Yeah, it is. I enjoyed it. I compared to Tommy, which for me honestly was a dick and door kind of thing. I'm just gonna say that up front. We'll get more into that later.
Did you just pause so I could put the sound effect in? Is that why you paused?
Well, yeah.
You heard the sound effect in your head.
I did. I was like, okay, and there's the slam. All right, cool. See, that's how it works. The magic of radio.
The other interesting thing about this is something you definitely don't see a lot in punk albums is harmonies. Like they actually had John Doe and Exene singing simultaneously, not even singing just the same melody, but actually working out harmonies. It works really, really well.
It almost reminded me, sound-wise, of what would later come out of all that when you had, like, when rockabilly kind of came back about.
That's what Billy Zoom really did bring, the rockabilly. And X, and you can hear a little bit of on this album, but down their further albums, you have much more of that punk rockabilly fusion.
Yeah.
And it really does define as their own sound.
Well, I think perhaps they even influenced a number of bands in the future because that sound carries over even in some acts today.
Absolutely.
One of the other interesting things about this album is they got the attention of Ray Manzarek, who was the former keyboard player and one of the founders of The Doors. And Manzarek says, I want to produce an album for you guys. He comes in, produces this album, and they actually did a punk cover of a Doors tune on the album.
Nice.
It was Soul Kitchen, and they actually had Manzarek playing keyboard. Punk album, but they have Ray Manzarek from The Doors playing keyboards, which is pretty cool.
That was cool.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I really like the Doors, but I get really sick of a fucking organ.
That's what she said.
There's just some songs where I'm like, all right, Ray, I know you're the founding member and you have this bittersweet relationship with Jim Morrison. He made you all really big, but you had to live under his shadow even though you were writing all these songs.
Yep.
He was a dick.
So a lot to like here. Some downsides though. The biggest downside being Exene. Let's come back to Exene for a second. So the title track on this is a narrative about a character who is very clearly racist, very clearly anti-Semitic, very clearly homophobic. And it was kind of played off at the time as, well, we're not saying this. This is a fictional character. It's based on a roommate I had who used to be racist and homophobic and anti-Semitic. Well, now it's come to light sort of in the last few years that maybe that's not the case, that maybe this actually was first person because Exene has gone completely off the goddamn deep end. She now makes videos on YouTube basically arguing that school shootings are a hoax to take away everybody's guns, anti-immigrant. So it's, in hindsight, it's kind of looking like maybe this whole homophobic, racist shit was a little bit more sincere than they were making it sound at the time.
So she's a cunt.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Just checking. Yeah.
And yet, sadly, though, I mean, she does bring a lot of really good lyrics and poetry into this band. Once you throw this out, and actually the song Los Angeles was featured at the end of the book Less Than Zero, but the movie was made from.
How do you feature a song at the end of a book?
Well, at the end of the book, he mentions the song. Apparently.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it does get mentioned, but yeah, you're right. She is she's off the she's off her meds.
She's a whore. Oh, sorry. Anyway, Scarlet Jezebel.
Now, I will say again, it's like what I said about the Pretenders. It's like, all right, Rolling Stone, I get what you did here. You picked X that deserved to be on here, but I felt like they really came into their own after this. Now, it is groundbreaking. It was the first to have more of melodic singing, especially with the dual singers, the male and the female. Yeah, some of it, like in the beginning, like it opens and it sounds like everything else from New York.
It's true.
It did sound like it, could have been like another Ramones or Johnny Thunders or Clash album, and until you start hearing some of their others with the rockabilly sound, when you hear something like Sugar Light.
Fair enough.
All right, should we move on to Tommy?
We slammed the door on that one, Steve.
Okay, so we have Tommy by The Who coming up against X, which is... Tommy is not the first rock opera. The general consensus is the first rock opera was an album called SF Sorrow by The Pretty Things. Yeah, you've probably never heard of it, but it's out there.
Well...
But But it is definitely the most famous rock opera. I think if you ask people to name rock operas, this is probably the one most people are going to name first. So The Who did this album. They're coming up on 1968. They're really unsure what direction they want to go in. They're getting a little bit older. They're still really well known for their live shows. However, the big sort of moment in all of their live shows was they would destroy all their equipment on stage, and they found out pretty quickly that gets a little expensive. So they were like perpetually in debt because they were destroying thousands of dollars of equipment every night and knew that that was not sustainable. So they said, well, where do we go from here? And Pete Townshend comes up with this concept of Tommy. The whole idea being, I'm going to come up with a set of songs that tell a definitive story from start, middle, and finish. Of course, this gets inspired because it's Pete Townshend. This gets inspired by Meher Baba, who we talked about when we talked about the Who's Next album. But the story of Tommy is kind of designed to take those teachings and turn it into some sort of narrative. Real quick, let me just go through the story, because if I don't, well, we'll talk about why it's important for me to go through the story here in a minute. The story of this album, you have an army captain, Captain Walker, goes off to war, goes missing, is believed dead. His wife is pregnant when he goes off to war, gives birth to their son, who is Tommy. Years later, Captain Walker shows up. Oh my God, he's alive after all. And he finds out his wife is with a new guy. The Captain Walker kills the new guy in front of Tommy. Tommy witnesses this whole thing, and to keep Tommy from saying anything, they basically gaslight him into you didn't see anything, this didn't happen, you didn't hear anything. So he starts to, because of the trauma, he starts to disassociate. He sort of like regresses into himself. And following that, his mother starts to sort of neglect him, leaving him alone to be physically abused by a cousin and sexually abused by an uncle. There is a quack doctor that shows up to say, hey, I can fix this kid. I'm going to send him to my wife, who will give him a dose of LSD. Tommy takes the LSD. He discovers he can feel vibrations in the air, and he can use those vibrations to become an expert at playing pinball. His parents then take him to an actual...
Perfect sense.
His parents then actually take him to a respected doctor. The doctor says, I think this is psychosomatic. So he puts Tommy in front of a mirror, and his parents realize, oh my God, he can actually see his reflection. And so Tommy starts spending hours staring at himself at a mirror until his mother gets fed up, smashes the mirror. That causes Tommy to recover all of his senses, but now he believes he's a religious leader. So he starts a religious movement, opens a camp, and his followers ultimately reject his teaching and leave, at which point he retreats inward again and becomes this sort of silent, deaf, dumb, and blind kid. That's the story.
One of the things that did not happen in late 2020 was that, Roger Daltrey actually had a follow-up to this album where Tommy, ran for president of the United States in 2020.
Really?
Okay.
There you go.
I didn't know that.
Little known fact.
He just made that up. It's an absolute fact, yes.
So as weird as that story is, though, it was a huge album. Reached number 4 in the UK album charts, number 2 in the UK album charts, number 4 in the US, had a ton of singles. The band toured with the album for years. In 1993, there was a Broadway stage version that was produced. There was a movie version that came out in 1975. So it really became this huge juggernaut for the band, and that's really why it's sort of the most well-known rock opera out there.
And to call it opera, just it is a musical. Yes, it's opera because you have the motif of the pinball wizard that keeps popping up in all the songs. Sure. It's almost like Wagner, there's a little piece that comes back and you're like, oh, this is that motif. But it really is a musical, and quite honestly, we have a lot of musicals driven by rock instrumentation because of Tommy.
That's absolutely true. It's this album not only showed that you could do Cory, you want to quibble over the term rock opera, but it showed that you could do that kind of a concept and actually make it successful. So you have other artists coming along that kind of mirror that, Pink Floyd's The Wall, Marvin Gaye, David Bowie with the whole Ziggy Stardust thing. But it also actually changed Broadway itself. I don't think without this album you have a Jesus Christ Superstar or Evita or Rent. Because this was really the album that showed you could bring that rock instrumentation into Broadway and have it work.
That's true.
And also the telling of a long story. You mentioned The Wall.
Right.
The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Yes.
Peter Gabriel based out on El Topo, the Jodorowsky film. Rush's 2112.
Oh, yeah.
Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime.
Hell yeah.
And then what we covered before, Green Day's American Idiot.
Which was a Broadway show.
Well, yes.
Which became a Broadway
show.
Like this one, it was an album first and then became a Broadway show. So, okay, so it huge amount of influence, no question. All right, so what's a little bit wrong with the album? What are some of the cons here?
A lot.
The reason I walked through the whole story of the album is because if I didn't and you sat down and listened to this for the first time, you would have no fucking clue what is going on. As a narrative, it is really poorly done. It's disjointed. It's all over the place. Early on, some of that seems to do with Townsend sort of painting himself into a corner. While they were still working on the album, he did an interview where he was asked about what they were working on. And he started talking, and he basically walked through everything I just said when I gave the plot summary. And then he sort of said it later. He's like, God, I wish I hadn't gone into all that detail, because then I felt like I was sort of locked in and couldn't change the story after that because I'd made all these public statements.
Yeah.
The biographer for The Who, Dave Marsh, actually came out later and said, honestly, the interview did a better job explaining the story than the album did.
It needed it.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, and after the album came out, Townsend gave more interviews where he kept trying to explain it, but people couldn't follow it. They finally realized when they went out on tour that they had a problem. So when they toured with the album, the programs actually had a plot summary right in the program for the live show, because they knew otherwise people weren't going to have a clue what the hell was going on.
I realized when I listened to the album, I knew it because of seeing the movie, and I also did see the Broadway production. But over the years, we all know the story now. As very unwell done as it is, but we at least know it. So when we hear it, we can imagine, the Acid Queen, Tina Turner, or the Pinball Wizard, Elton John.
Yep. Yeah. I actually sat down and rewatched the movie myself before we did this, and they changed a couple of story elements. So I said earlier that Captain Walker kills the new man in Tommy's mother's life. In the movie, it's exactly the opposite. The new guy kills Captain Walker. They changed a few things. They wrote a few new songs to try to bridge some of these narrative gaps. The movie closes some of those details and makes it a little easier to follow, but it's still fucking weird.
Did the movie include I Can See for Miles?
No, that wasn't this album.
No, I know, but did the movie add that song?
I
vaguely remember that being at the end. Roger Waters.
I don't think so. I just watched it last week.
Adultery swimming or something. Okay.
Yeah,
you might maybe that's quadrophenia. I don't know.
The whole thing left me just again waiting for that sound effect. There you go.
If you haven't, if you have, I would say to people, if you, between listening to the album and watching the movie, sit down and watch the movie first, because it does flow a little bit better. It does. The movie is not great, but it's visually really interesting. There's a lot of really interesting high energy moments in it. Anne Margaret plays Tommy's mother. I will say that she's great, but you are not ready for Anne Margaret writhing around on the floor in a giant pool of molten chocolate and baked beans, which is, honest to God, something that happens in the film.
Yeah, yeah.
Boys, get out the lube.
Pretty much.
Bring tissues. It's a tearjerker? No,
it's a
tear.
jerker. It's just a jerker.
Pinball Wizard is still an incredibly great song.
Oh, there's a lot of great songs on this album. I'm not dissing a lot of the songs on the. I mean, there's some crap on the album, but there's a lot of great songs on the album. I'm not dissing the album. It's if your objective was, I want to have an album that tells a coherent story, well, you failed at that objective, because it's not a coherent story.
Oh, no. And that whole underture, I'm like, what the hell was this? 10 minutes? It was what Pete Townsend's way of saying, well, you need an intermission. He must have had the movie in his head.
Well, what I read was that was supposed, so the Acid Queen gives him the LSD, and the underture was supposed to be sort of a musical representation of his trip on the LSD.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, but not that makes
still.
Again, if I've got to sit here and explain it to you, it didn't work.
No, it didn't.
Well, yeah, and for me, it did not.
All right. I think we can probably move on and put this to a vote at this point.
Let's give this a bullet.
So now in this season, before we used to have one person defend an album or defend each album, and one person would judge and pick between the two. Now the three of us are voting, and majority will move this album on to the next round. And Dave, you get to vote first this time.
I have to tell you, the whole idea that we just talked about the fact that this was designed to be a quote-unquote rock opera, but the story is completely unintelligible, that's a big deal. It's almost a big enough deal where I was tempted to vote for X on this, because these are both good albums. But on the whole, I think what still salvages it is, if you think about the ongoing impact of these albums, clearly the influence of Tommy is way bigger than the X album. And so based on that criteria, I think I still have to give it to Tommy.
I am second, and as much as I really liked X, and I really like what they were doing at that time and how they transformed punk into a different medium in a way, Tommy still was, I think you mentioned it in here, but we didn't talk about it, how prog rock, a lot of prog rock would not have happened without this influence.
Yeah, and we did talk about it, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, The Wall, etc.
Right. But yeah, I have to give it to Tommy. Scott?
Yeah, I was almost, well, Tommy makes me want to slam my dick in a door, and X didn't, so X wins. But no, because I'm going to give it to Tommy simply because, like you mentioned, the prog influence, and Townsend's playing is stellar. Entwistle's playing stellar. The musicianship on the album was, again, top notch as always with the Who. So really, I have to give it to them for that. I'll still slam my dick in the door if I hear Tommy again, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, Tommy just made it to the next round, so you will be hearing Tommy again.
God,
yes,
dicks.
Also, keep that in mind when you're voting. You're gonna have to come back to this at some point,
motherfucker. Wow.
All right.
Now
we'll
take a quick break.
Take you into our discussion.
Yeah.
Crazy.
All right. So for our middle part discussion this time, we're going to be talking about artists selling their catalog. We've talked in the past about selling out. Now we're going to be talking about selling off. So over the last few years, you've probably seen this. There's been one news report after another with various artists selling off all the rights they have to their songs. One of the deals that got the most attention was Bob Dylan last year. Dylan sold the rights to pretty much everything he's done since 1962 for $500 million. Other artists that have done this, John Legend, Neil Diamond, Dire Straits, and the deals show no sign of slowing up. According to the media reports, right now Pink Floyd is currently shopping for a buyer to sell their catalog. So we thought, well, what's going on here? Can we talk about exactly what are these transactions? What are people selling? Why do so many of them seem to be selling right now? And just what the hell is going on? So
yeah, when I started seeing this, I was like, do these people know something we don't?
Yeah.
I mean, I do know that the whole streaming services and everything is changing, but is there something industry-wide that's about to occur?
So before we get to that, though, let's make sure people understand what this is, because I think people that don't work in the music business may be a little unfamiliar with what we're talking about here. So let's first establish what they're selling. So whenever a song gets written or recorded, there are legal rights for the people that are involved with that writing and recording. And the two main ones are recording rights and publishing rights. So recording rights are the ones that are a little easiest to understand. Whatever song you hear on the radio that you love, every time you hear it, that specific recording of that specific song, the artists who were in the studio who took part in that recording are getting paid. Every time it streams, every time it shows up in a TV show or a movie, every greatest hits album, that particular recording gets used, those people are making money. Publishing rights is a little bit harder to wrap your head around. That's the rights to the song as a concept. Right, so whatever format we're talking about. So whether it's the original recording or an entirely new recording. So if Dylan writes a song, he has the publishing rights, even if he never does anything with that, even if he never records it. If he goes into the studio and records it, he has rights to the recording too. But even if it never gets recorded, he has rights to the concept of the song. And because it, yeah, go ahead.
So wait, with Dylan then, so when the Byrds recorded Tambourine Man,
he got paid because he owned the rights to the concept behind the song. He came up with the idea, he came up with the lyrics, he came up with the music. Now they made money too, obviously, because they had recording rights because they were the ones in the studio on that recording. But as the publishers,
so they both got paid.
They both got paid. Exactly.
Okay.
In a bigger sense, publishing rights are much more lucrative.
Much more lucrative because it's not just dependent on what you have recorded as an artist. If anybody uses that song, you're making money.
So for all those versions of, and you insert song here.
Yesterday.
Every goddamn asshole that you've heard singing Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen's estate is making money off of that.
He's rolling over his grave fast enough to burn a biscuit.
Now, a lot of times these rights, what makes this a little bit even more tricky to understand, a lot of times these rights are in with different people. The publishing rights are usually the songwriter exclusively, but if there were multiple people involved in writing the song, then of course they share those rights. The rights to the recording, the actual recordings themselves, that's usually shared with the label and the artists that are in the studio. And if you're talking about a band, every member that contributed to that recording owns a share of the recording rights, just by virtue of having been in there and played on the recording. And some of these deals, sometimes the artists are selling the publishing rights, sometimes they're selling the recording rights, sometimes it's both. Dylan actually did 2 separate deals. So first he sold his publishing rights to Universal for $300 million. Then later in a second deal, he sold the rights to his recordings for another $200 million to Sony.
Nice.
Yeah. And finally to make this even more confusing, sometimes the person who owns either right may only sell off part. So for example, Neil Young sold 50% of his rights for $150 million, but he retains the other 50%. So if Neil Young wrote a song and somebody else uses it, he still gets half of the royalties from that because he still retained 50% of his publishing rights. Another example, Stevie Nicks. She sold 80% of her rights, but she kept the other 20.
Wow.
So that means she's getting the 80% payout up front, but she's still getting the 20%
The ongoing royalties on the 20, exactly.
Royalties that probably go to like an LLC or something.
Sure. It's a way to keep money rolling in. And and as we get older, the lean times get more common.
Well, but before we go further, one of my thoughts about this is if these artists are selling off now, I mean, we're talking about Springsteen, Dylan, Neil Young, Stevie Nicks, are they getting out while they're still relevant? I mean, who knows 50, 100 years from now or Pink Floyd as well, if their music will still be relevant in 50 years. And if they're just taking the money now, while they can.
I think that is some of it. So one of the, you mentioned, Cory, the streaming environment has been changing. I mean, when streaming first appeared, it absolutely wrecked the entire music industry, and suddenly nobody was making money anymore. But as streaming has now evolved into more subscription-based services where people have bought into the concept of, I will give you X dollars every month to stream as much as I want to, the revenue has gone back up again. It hasn't gone back up to where it was before streaming, but it has gone back up a little bit. But one of the things during the pandemic that executives noticed is that older, more established songs that people knew and loved already were getting more streams than the newer stuff. And so there's a particularly hot market right now for some of these older baby boomer type acts. And I think to your point, Cory, it's while there is that appetite, a lot of these older acts are saying, let me get in while the getting's good before that trend changes again.
Yeah, so what if they used our song in a Nike commercial or whatever, it's pays us $1 every time they do, so fucking go for it.
Well, and when Bob Dylan did it, my first thought was, because this was after, he was like one of the first, and my thought was, okay, he's doing this because there's not going to be any disputes with his family or his children of what to do with his catalog when he dies. He's already sold it off. They can't mess with it. They can't touch it. They can't do anything. Because when Tom Petty died, I think his daughters and his last wife are still feuding over the estate and what to do with it. And
not only is it sad, but they usually feud for years, and then basically all the legal fees end up eating up all the actual money that could have been made.
Right.
And who suffers from that? Fans.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a Prince album that was released, I think, a year or two after his death, and it was probably something that was just sitting in the vault in Minnesota, and it was him just playing the guitar, or not playing the guitar, he was playing the piano, and he was obviously drunk and or on something, who knows, and it's not good. It's still Prince. You're like, wow, but he was screwing around. He was having a good time. He's probably finding a few ideas. This was not something that was meant to go to the public.
Yeah, he didn't plan for that to be an album.
Yeah,
correct.
I think there's I said, I think there's a lot of reasons at play here. We talked about, it's a lot easier to leave your kids a pool of money than it is to leave them complicated music rights that they then end up fighting over. But then to the point you guys are making now, you can also negotiate these deals in a way that actually retains some control. So you can actually have it written into the contract if you're so inclined. I don't want my songs ever used in TV commercials. I don't ever want my songs being used by politicians of a particular political party that I don't agree with, those kinds of things. So you actually, not only can you get this infusion of cash up front, but you can actually sort of put parameters and make sure that material that you never wanted to come out never sees the light of day.
You know what? I like that, because now it's not the artist going after a political campaign to sue them. It's now someone like Sony or BMG that have the lawyers, that have the money, that can go after them and sue them and out-lawyer them.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I mean, BMG's going to outgun any up-and-coming politician.
Yep. Another trend, when we talk about why is it happening now, I do think it's some of these older acts cashing in just while the market's hot. But another thing that is going on right now is the tax laws. At least right now, when you sell a portfolio, let me back up. If you're collecting royalties off of a song you wrote or a song you recorded, that is income, and you pay income tax rates. And if you're in the top tax bracket, which most of these artists are, you're going to pay 37% of your income back in taxes. If you sell the rights alone, that money that you take in from that gets taxed as capital gains, where the top tax rate is only 20%. So you're not only getting this huge infusion of cash up front, you're paying 17% less tax on that infusion of cash than you would if you'd sat around waiting for the royalties to come in. And I think that the reason that's prompting people to move now is tax laws change every year. There is a concern that, Congress might take that away at some point so that you no longer get that favorable tax treatment. And so let me get in and get my cash now and save all that money in taxes.
And this way, they can put the money away for their children or for a foundation that takes care of their family for generations, and they're not dependent on royalties that could just dry up.
Right. Yeah. Set up a living trust.
So I think those are all considerations on the seller side. Let's talk briefly, though, about the buyer side. You mentioned, I guess we'll start with who's buying. You mentioned BMG earlier. Well, we also talked about Universal, Sony, all these big labels. They're doing a lot of these deals, but there are actually newer companies now that have come out in the last few years that have just made this their primary business model. And the two biggest ones are a company called Primary Wave Music and then a second company called Hypnosis. Primary Wave, started by a former record executive. They started in 2006 when they bought Kurt Cobain, or 50% of Kurt Cobain's rights, from Courtney Love after his death. Then they ended up buying a lot more deals. Chicago, Hall & Oates, Alice Cooper, Boston, all sold to Primary Wave. They later branched out into other services like management and marketing. So, for example, in 2009, Def Leppard hired Primary Wave to market their catalog and collect the royalties on behalf of the band. So they didn't sell the actual rights to the catalog. They said, collecting the royalties is a pain in the ass. We're going to pay you to do that for us.
They made them property managers.
Exactly.
Management.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting trick.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And then even
Make them do.
And then the
work.
company that's even newer is Hypnosis. They were founded in 2018, but they have quickly become a big player. They have bought rights from Nikki Sixx, Richie Sambora, Blondie, David Crosby, Barry Manilow, Chrissy Hynde. They bought 65% of Journey's rights, and by the end of 2020, they did a financial release. By the end of 2020, they owned 60,000 songs, and they were worth an estimated $1.66 billion.
Wow.
Holy shit.
And that's just radio play, streaming, television, movies, etc.
Whatever they are entitled to do with those songs, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, the typical multiplier, Hypnosis released numbers, I think it was Hypnosis that said their average deal is they basically look at the pool of songs, how much revenue did those songs bring in last calendar year from January to December, and we're going to pay on average about 15 times that.
Damn.
Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. There's estimates that they gave Dylan 25 times, or that Dylan collected 25 times, but the average is 15.
Wow.
And actually, just to show you, I mentioned earlier that sometimes these legal rights can be shared by multiple people. Really good example of that is Fleetwood Mac. So Mick Fleetwood sold his share of Fleetwood Mac's catalog to BMG. Lindsey Buckingham and Christine McVie sold their shares to Hypnosis. Stevie Nicks sold her share to Primary Wave. So not only do they all individually own these rights, they can go off and sell to different buyers.
Oh, so there's four of them. There were five in the band. So Mick Fleetwood sold a fifth of the share of, let's say, the Chain.
Well, it could have been a fifth of the share of the recording of the Chain, but the Chain was kind of a collective thing. But if you pick a song that Mick Fleetwood was the sole songwriter, he would also be sharing 100% of the publishing rights for that song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess Mick was the bad example. Lindsey's the better example
Lindsey,
here.
yeah. Said Buckingham writes like nobody's business.
Yep. Right, but some of the songs are collaborations with Stevie and or Christine.
And how much did Buckingham sell, for publishing rights or recording rights?
This is why artists will fight forever on who gets songwriting credit on the album, because that dictates a lot about how much money you're going to make off that song in the future.
Yeah, what was the line you said this?
Oh yeah. So there's a lot of like pop music stuff that's written by committee now. Basically, the record labels hire professional songwriters to come in and write whole albums for artists, and then at the last minute, the artist contract, they'll come in and tweak this or that and get a songwriting credit, and then by virtue of getting the songwriting credit, they get a share of the royalties from the songwriting.
All because they changed a word or two.
Right. Write a line, get a dime or something?
No, the phrase you're thinking of is change a word, get a third.
Oh, there you go.
There
Yep.
you go.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's true, but sad in a way. It's just like, come on. That's what I really hate about modern songwriting is that sometimes they get teams to write for them, and people are like, oh, these artists are so great. It's like, no, those artists aren't the ones creating the music you're hearing. You're just hearing the voice that they want to use for it.
But this has been the paradigm for a long time. We talked about the Brill Building.
True. Yes. No, you're absolutely right about that.
That's where a lot of the stuff in the 60s came out.
Yep.
You know, the Monkees, the Association,
Yep.
the Beach Boys, well, not completely the Beach Boys, but still, they were all written by these publishing houses.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's been going on in Nashville for how long?
Ooh, Nashville's so incestuous that way.
I was just going to say, and this is why, though, is because if they write the song, if you bring in a hired gun to write the song, and you have an employment agreement with that hired gun that basically says, hey, notwithstanding the fact that as the writer, you would normally own the publishing, you are assigning all of your rights over to us as a term of your employment. Now, if I'm the label who hired that guy to come in and write the song, I got those publishing rights for perpetuity.
There's a great album by of all bands, Wasp, and they talk. It's a concept album about the record industry and about how they will sometimes have bands record an album just to be put in the can. It won't ever see the light of day or anything, but it's just a matter of how much they own.
Well, and you've had acts too that have. It's not uncommon for this. This was a problem years ago, especially when just acts weren't as savvy about all these legal aspects, but it also still happens today with younger artists who don't have a lot of leverage. They find out the hard way that they don't actually own the rights, that they sign them away as part of their deal. And so you actually have artists that'll go out and re-record all of their old songs because they finally figure out they don't actually own the rights to those recordings.
Didn't Taylor Swift do that
Taylor Swift,
recently?
She's still doing that, I think, actually. She's re-recording her entire back catalog just for that reason.
Oh, the shitty business practices of the music world.
So, and then in terms of what businesses get out of this, I mean, Cory, you mentioned the streaming revenue. You also mentioned the ability to license the song for TV and movies. That's a possible revenue stream. After Michael Jackson bought the Beatles catalog, it was only a few years before Revolution showed up in a Nike commercial, as you said. Something I read that I had not previously thought of is that money doesn't necessarily stop once the episode is over. In other words, if I license my song to a TV show, and then that show goes into syndication for years, like Friends or Seinfeld, every single time it airs, I'm getting a check.
Yeah, because it's like it's playing on the radio or streaming on a service. It's being heard.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and speaking of services, and that's the other one, like the big wave of the future right now, is you I think you made this point, Cory, offline, is that social media is now becoming sort of the new frontier for legal rights.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned like political campaigns. Like what happens when you go to the mall or you go to public places and they're playing music?
Well, I would imagine, I mean, usually in a commercial setting like that, the music is coming piped in either through a company that does such things or simply that they're paying for a subscription service and broadcasting the music that way. But the point is that the money is still getting handed over. It's just being done behind the scenes. Right,
because I have read where a lot of acts are like, yeah, you're playing my song, I'm at some public event and I'm not getting paid for this because they go, well, it's just it's public domain or something. It's not over radio, it's not through a streaming service, so someone's just got the CD or well, that wouldn't be a cassette anymore, or an MP3 player pumping the music. Well, that's I think one of the challenges that some artists have, I think, actually is exactly that, is if it is from a streaming service. Right. If the campaign manager for that political campaign has paid for an Apple Music subscription, not a lot the artist can do to stop that. You know, they paid their money. Because I tell you what, if you start charging DJs, Kool and the Gang would probably own the world by now with Celebration.
Right? That's true.
I mean, that's a staple at every kind of party celebration where you have a DJ. They will absolutely play that song. You could go in with DJ Bingo, and that's your free space. The other thing owning those publishing and recording rights can give you, if you're a record label, is other artists that you have under contract, you can now give them free reign to sample those songs, to cover those songs, because you own the rights to them. So if I'm Sony Music and I have 1,000 artists under contract and one of them has a huge song, the other 999 are free to go out and sample it or do a cover version because I own the rights and I give them that permission. So Sony hires someone, a new artist, and he's really good, and they say, hey, you do really well if you covered this Dylan song. Right. Wow. And we can make that happen because we own the rights to that Dylan song. Okay. I think we've covered this.
And
So I will say, Dave, thank you. You did the bulk of the research here. And it's astounding. So thank you.
It is that lays it paints an interesting picture, I think, of the industry as a whole.
The benefit of laying in bed with a fever all day yesterday.
Wow, you did that while you were sick, huh?
No, I wasn't sick. It was side effects from the vaccine.
Oh,
booster.
right.
Okay, let's move on to the next round, shall we?
Yep, let's.
Very exciting.
Well, welcome back. We are on to our second matchup. Our second duel today takes on two very dissimilar artists that would only find themselves on the same tour if there was a global cause or Bob Geldof was involved.
Right.
In one corner stands the youngest artist to win a Grammy, Lorde, with her second album, Melodrama, an album that was originally going science fiction enough to get the attention of George Clinton, but then became a breakup album with more emotion and depth than another 19-19-year-old named Alanis Morissette did with Jagged Little Pill. Lorde takes on Oasis with their first studio album, Definitely Maybe, a breakout juggernaut that quickly made Oasis a household name. And thankfully, when we hear the name Gallagher now, we may think of the brothers Liam and Noel before we think of a fruit-pounding comedian from Tampa. And we begin with Lorde's Melodrama.
Well, Cory, you said it. Second album from Lorde. The first album came out when she was 13 years old. I mean, this girl was just like an absolute prodigy. And a 13-year-old, I was thinking a 13-year-old performing under a single name like Madonna or Cher, like it's a little ballsy. But you probably would too if your full name was Ella Marija Lani Yelich O'Connor.
Right.
Because that's a little much for a stage name.
Yes, it is. But the album's good.
The album's very good. The album is very good.
It's incredibly good.
So she had this first album, like you said, youngest person to ever win a Grammy, got signed to a label at age 13, and now she's a few years older, starting to get a little bit of disillusion with the idea of fame and celebrity. Just went through it simultaneously right around the same time, goes through a really bad breakup, and both of those things kind of feed in and inspire this album.
I have to say that what I really liked was it was definitely outside my wheelhouse. You know, I've not really heard this before, but I would take a lot of the songs and I compared them to what Peter Gabriel did on his first solo albums. The innovation and the instrumentation chances he took, especially with programming and the Fairlight. Is that what it's called? That him and Kate Bush.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yep. The Fairlight was that synth that Kate Bush used on Hounds of Love, and yeah.
Right. And Peter Gabriel used it on his album Security.
Right.
But I didn't see a mention of it on this album, but it was very reminiscent because we have better software and whatnot nowadays. You don't need the Fairlight. You can easily make that sound.
Well, a lot of this album was just written, I think, with somebody in the studio throwing bits and bops of things together. There wasn't. It didn't seem like there was a lot of musicianship going on.
I did find that a lot of the production and programming credits were just programming, and there was not any listing of any instrumentation.
Yeah. Well, not surprising, but at the same time,
that is the sound, though. That is what works now, and that's what people like. And
I actually found the sound to be I found this whole album to be very reminiscent of Body Talk by Robin, which we talked about on another episode.
Yes.
Because a lot of it is poppy dance music with a driving beat,
right?
Except the lyrics are very honest and introspective, and so you get this sort of I don't paradox. I probably the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying. It's you get this sort of collision of deep, meaningful lyrics against what you typically think of as light, airy, non-consequential music.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm gonna say it. It's what The Cure did.
Well, I was going to say too.
The lyrics
to
some degree,
on this are a lot more poetic, and they have it. Oh well. She has a better turn of phrase, I think, than a lot of people, and especially people her age. So,
well, yes, and I did read her mother is a famous poet in New Zealand and has won awards. So she was exposed to a lot of poetry, a lot of reading. I wrote it down somewhere else. I don't know where I put it of some of the authors and all that inspired her. So, I mean, this is something we find with people that are incredible lyricists. They are well read and they do have a broader education in literature and in poetry than most others.
I think she demonstrates being well read and having that education and background, but also demonstrates sort of a deep self-knowledge and self-understanding. Once again, I'm probably using the wrong word, But they one of my favorite tracks on this album is actually one of the slower ones called Liability, where she's basically talking about constant fear that she's never going to find anybody who accepts her for what she is. The one lyric that I jotted down here. The truth is, I'm a toy that people enjoy till all the tricks don't work anymore, and then they're bored of me. It's like, Jesus Christ. That's just crushing. And for a 19-year-old to say something like that?
Yeah. There's not many people that are in their 30s or 40s, much less 50s, that could come up with something that profound.
True. And honestly, that was, for me, probably the best part of the whole album was her poetic bend, her turn of phrase. I like her voice too. It's very mellow.
I was going to say that too. I really like her voice and the way she sings.
Yeah.
And I can see where Billie Eilish would have picked up on this.
Oh, sure. I can see why people cover her too, because there's a cover, for instance, it goes back to her first album with Royals, and why that song was so huge. But OTEP, the hardcore chick in LA, she has been OTEP. Anyway, OTEP did a version of Royals, and it's like a crushing death metal version. It's kick ass. It is so good. It made me go, oh, I love this song even more.
Just a couple, before we move on, just a couple of fun facts that aren't really relevant to the debate about the quality of the album. But just a couple of things I thought were interesting. Number one, she gave an interview last year where she said that all of her albums correlate to whatever drug she was using at the time that she wrote and recorded them. So that 2013, and remember, 13 years old, that 2013 album, it was titled Pure Heroine, but heroin with an E on the end of it, like a female hero. That was all inspired and about alcohol usage. Melodrama, which is this album, was inspired by MDMA.
What is MDMA?
Oh,
ecstasy.
It's ecstasy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not cool.
And Solar Power, which is her most recent, was supposed to be she started taking LSD, and it was supposed to be about LSD, and then she had a bad trip and said fuck that, and she just made it about weed instead.
Everything's about weed.
Yeah.
Well, ecstasy, Molly, same thing. That kind of shit.
The other thing, interesting fun fact is when she was working on this album, she got these little snippets of ideas and she puts them up on a little, like Post-it notes on a wall. They're all color coded and what she thinks they mean. The reason they're all color coded, we talked about this with Hendrix. She has synesthesia.
Oh, nice.
So she's actually one of these, music relates to a color for her.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does. And it actually does come through with a couple of lyrics she said where I remember reading about the synesthesia and being like, oh, that's what she's talking about. That is cool.
All right, should we move on to Oasis?
Yeah, I really don't have anything negative to say about this.
No, I was trying to think of something bad to say about it. I really had a hard time.
I did too.
Lorde?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I have nothing bad to say about the Lorde album. It was fantastic from start to finish.
It really was.
So I was like, okay, well, I might have to get this now. Hell.
All right. Now, Oasis, definitely maybe. This is their studio debut as Oasis. I think there was a previous album, but it did not have, which one is it? Noel? Yeah, Noel wasn't on that, and they were under the name Rain. So this was the first one they did as Oasis. Noel Gallagher comes in, the older brother telling his younger brother, hey, I can make you all big stars. Let me take over. Let me run the whole show. I'll write the sonons. And, well, I mean, it was a hit.
And he was right.
He was right.
He was right.
He's a real cocksnot, but he's right.
And that encapsulates Oasis as a whole. Every time they did interviews, every time they said anything publicly, they were just so goddamn arrogant and full of themselves and just jerks. And the two of them, even the two brothers, can't fucking stand each other anymore. And you wanted to hate them so bad. And then they would produce these songs that were so goddamn catchy. You're like, God damn it. I want to hate this, but it's actually really good.
It's true. Some of these songs, they ring. Just like you're like, yeah, this is catchy and I can absolutely listen to this. And the dual guitar attack really works. You have a good solid rhythm. You got the other one with a lead kind of carrying the melody, and the production. They compress it down to where when a chorus hits, it has that feeling like it blows up, and I think that's what people in dance clubs like to hear, and that's what attracts a lot of people to music too. Is when they have that moment that all of a sudden the songs just open up. Do you know what I mean?
I agree with you, but I'm sitting here watching Scott shake his head, so I feel like he's got an opinion here.
So Scott doesn't.
Well, no, it's not even that. It's just, Jesus Christ, man. I mean, that whole album is just so.
Okay, I know we don't really have to go in order with positive and negatives. I said the songs I wrote feel like they were cultivated from all the popular sounds of the 90s, like an amalgamation. The vocals sound like most of the other acts at the time, that kind of high-pitched, kind of, high energy. The driving drums are something that we just heard from Green Day. The guitar riffs remind me of Driving and Crying, and the energy and the feel of these songs feel like they just had listened to Cracker's Kerosene Hat album.
Exactly.
It does sound like Kerosene.
And the similar overall feel was, and this is something more Scott and I are familiar with, is Jason Bieler and what he was doing with Saigon Kick. 2 years before that. So, like, if you listen to The Lizard, you listen to Water, and then you listen to this album, you go, yeah, it's like Noel sat there and just kind of cultivated, curated, okay, this little piece works, and he created something that it created a lot of familiar musical landscapes. So
Water blows this away.
So but that's what I'm saying. You have all these familiar musical landscapes, so that when you're hearing it, there's a comfort in that familiarity.
Yeah,
and a lot of stuff in the 90s that sounded alike was they all had that same kind of high energy, good, positive feel.
And you're touching on a larger issue with Noel's songwriting, which is he's gotten a lot of criticism over the years from just basically ripping things off from other artists.
Yeah,
he kind of owns it. I mean, he's when people have asked him about it, he said, "Look, this is the stuff that I grew up listening to. I liked it. Yeah, I'm doing if you hear something that sounds familiar, it's because to some degree I'm doing a little bit of a tribute to that other song."
There is the argument too that you hear stuff as a young kid, and maybe it is somewhat subconsciously in there when you're writing a song. You're like, wow, this sounds really good, but you don't realize it's something you've heard before.
Yeah, I ripped off a lot of Led Zeppelin, but my songs don't sound like Led Zeppelin songs, so it's like.
Well, I mean, going back to the beginning, Cory, you mentioned it. When Noel joined the band, it was, I'll join the band if you give me control and I'll make you famous. So this was always an attempt to become superstars. This was never going to be a band that was going to be content playing, a few bar gigs here and there. They always wanted to get famous. So I think Noel's approach of taking other things that he knows works and then just repurposing them as his own song, it's formulaic. It's actually a conscious attempt to write something that he knows people are going to accept.
Yeah, and that's what it felt like. It did seem somewhat formulaic. Of if you had like check boxes of like all the stuff from the 90s, it would be like, okay, you got the high energy vocals, check. You got kind of that pounding drum line, check. You've got, I did like the Rock and Roll Star. What was it? The first track?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I did like how they gave it like the rock ending, like you were at a show and they were carrying it out like it was a live, like it was a live song. I said, you know what? That was well done.
We used to do that big rock ending.
Yes, it was. It was a big rock ending.
Yeah, I love that. That's always fun.
I give them credit on that one. And also,
it's not.
Go on.
Sorry.
No.
I was just going to say it's not necessarily fun for people in the audience to hear the big rock ending because you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake, in the song.
Yeah,
but as players, we really enjoy that. But as listeners, I don't enjoy that as much, to be honest.
It's like anything else. The noodling and drum solos, leave them for the live show.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
All right.
Somebody
shall we
slap
take a vote?
Liam and Noel.
Okay, so I am first, and as much as definitely maybe would be more my wheelhouse with its sound and its guitars and all, and if I'm going to put something on to kind of pep up my day, I'm going to choose it. But Lorde, I was blown away by this. It was an amazing album. I had no idea. I didn't know anything really about her other than Royals going into this. So I'm giving this to Lorde. Scott?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I heard Melodrama. I heard I think one song off of it a long time ago, and I'm very familiar with Royals. But then listening to the whole thing was like, oh wow, where has she been? Because she's she fits into my next Tori Amos, next Kate Bush, obsession.
Yes, I did think Tori Amos too. When her album came out, it was completely different, a whole different sound. Right. You had to kind of adapt to it. That's
Little Earthquakes.
That's what she's doing here.
It was so new, and that's exactly how this sounds. It gives me it gives me Tori vibes.
All right, Dave.
So I'm going to give it to
I mean, that's 2 votes, so my vote doesn't matter. But for what it's worth, I would have gone with Lorde as well. I actually like Oasis. As much as I think all of the criticisms are valid. Again, they do write those catchy goddamn songs.
Oh, absolutely.
But out of the Oasis sort of catalog, I don't think this is the best album, and certainly not up against something like Lorde, which is a lot more original and innovative. And it's for me, it's the Lorde album too.
Cool.
Which is a huge. We got a huge upset here, by the way, because Oasis wasn't like a top 10 on the Rolling Stone list or anything. They were 217, but Lorde was all the way down at 460. Remember, it's only a list of 500, so she was pretty much dead near the bottom.
Yeah.
We've just remedied that.
Well, she deserves her place higher up.
Agreed.
Yes, and Oasis does have another album on their What's the Story Morning Glory is also on the top 500.
Yeah, because they're dicks. But we'll just go into that later.
Yeah. For the next show, I've got the 2 matchups ready to go. In round 1, it will be Wilco with Yankee Hotel Foxtrot.
Cool.
Taking on Jillian Welch with an album called Time, The Revelator. I do not know who Jillian Welch is. Or Gillian.
I know that album. This is an interesting matchup.
Okay.
I'll just say that. It's an interesting matchup.
All right.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And in the second round, it will be Michael Jackson with Off the Wall against Kendrick Lamar to Pimp a Butterfly.
Very interesting matchup.
And both of these are in the top 50.
Oh, well, okay. I've heard of Jillian Welch, but I have not listened to her before that I'm aware of. So
I don't know anything. This will be, hey, this is one of those things why I like doing this. Find something new.
I love doing this. Exactly. Sometimes you just pick up something, you're like, oh, wow. That's like, I need to have Lorde in my library. Oh, who knew?
Yes. Absolutely.
I didn't expect that. And it's nice when I find things that I don't expect. He's not always shouting profanities, children.
Yes, it's not something as familiar as Oasis.
And he's not always slamming his dick in the door either, children. That's his penis in the door. Don't slam his penis in the door.
How many times do I got to play that clip?
A lot. Okay,
a lot.
Just do it over my voice right now. Just slam, 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 slam.
And that's it, folks. Thank you
for joining us.
Praise Satan!
Praise Satan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You put it up your ass and you scream and you twist it to the left and somebody goes, oh, look at that. Is it going to turn yellow? And you're like, oh my God, I think I'm seeing stars.